everybody, I'm Megan. Welcome back to another video. We're not in the library today. Instead, we're in my home because today we're going to talk about 10 reasons that you should read The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. Now, unfortunately, there are so many of these books I couldn't even hold them all up here, but just to give you a quick rundown, the first book is Interview with the Vampire, absolute classic. In fact, this is my signed copy. The second one is The Vampire Lestat. The third one is The Queen of the Damned. The fourth one is The Tale of the Body Thief. The fifth one is Memnoch the Devil. The sixth one is The Vampire Armand. The seventh one is Merrick. The eighth one is Blood and Gold. The ninth one is Blackwood Farm. And the 10th one and the last in the main series is Blood Canticle, which is also a crossover with the Witching Hour series, also by Anne Rice, obviously. Next comes two kind of offshoots called the New Tales of the Vampire, which are Pandora and Vittoria the Vampire, who is not even a character in all of the other series. You wouldn't have to read these. I'm not even really going to talk about them today, but they're there in case you're interested. Then Anne Rice took a very long time between writing the Vampire Chronicles. She stopped for quite a while and then more recently wrote these three, which we have the Prince Lestat in the Realms of Atlantis, and Blood Communion. Anne Rice is my favorite author, and today I thought I'd share with you the 10 reasons why you should also read these books. There are many reasons you should read these books. It was very hard for me to narrow this down, but the number one reason, and I honestly wanted to use this for numbers 1, 2, and 3, but I didn't think that would be very fair, but by far the number one reason that you should read these books is because of the character of Lestat. So The Vampire Lestat, it's even book 2 of the series, literally named after him. In the first book, he is not the main character, but we do see him in the first book, and we see that he is portrayed as a villain. He seems kind of evil, I guess you would say, but then you get to know him more throughout the series. He becomes the protagonist who turns more into like an anti-hero. He's super charismatic. He is hilarious, but he is also incredibly intelligent, likes to think about big existential questions, things like that. And his personality, I don't know how Anne Rice came up with this character, honestly. He is the best personality of any character I've ever read. That is the main reason you should read this book, because he's the best character in all of literature of all time ever. The second reason you should read The Vampire Chronicles is for the writing quality. So Anne Rice is a master storyteller. She reminds me of somebody like a George R.R. Martin, somebody who really carefully crafts every scene. In fact, just a little side note, she plans out a chapter and doesn't stop writing that chapter until she's done. Like, it may take her all day, but she is going to write until she is done with that chapter. So one whole chapter seems very, very cohesive because of that. And you can tell that one chapter is almost like a story in itself, because it's so fulfilling from the beginning to end of the chapter. It almost sounds more like classic literature, like it's definitely sort of a literary fiction style, although she's writing about vampires. She uses lots of figurative language. She uses lots and lots of description. I love knowing what New Orleans looks like, you know, in the 1800s or whatever time period she happens to be writing about, because it is set in different time periods, which we'll talk about in a minute. The vividness of it puts you really into the atmosphere, and it is definitely one of the main reasons that I love these novels so much. The next reason you should read this book is because of the setting, which I was just talking about a minute ago, New Orleans. New Orleans in her stories is just this magical, wonderful place. And honestly, I wanted to go there so badly after reading these books that I made a PowerPoint presentation to try to convince my parents to take me there when I was young, when I was in high school. They didn't take me. I've since been 3 times and have stopped by Anne Rice's former house. I even got a Facebook comment from her on one of my posts that I made when I put a picture of me with her house. So that was really awesome. So just to prove to you how awesome New Orleans is in these books, let me read you a little snippet from Interview with the Vampire from Louis's point of view. He says, "Let me describe New Orleans as it was then and as it was to become, so you can understand how simple our lives were. There was no city in America like New Orleans. It was filled not with the French and Spanish of all classes who had formed in part its particular aristocracy, but later with immigrants of all kinds, the Irish and the German in particular. Then there were not only the black slaves, yet unhomogenized and fantastical in their different tribal garb and manners, but the great growing class of the free people of color, those marvelous people of our mixed blood and that of the islands, who produced a magnificent and unique cast of craftsmen, artists, poets, and renowned feminine beauty." He goes on to talk about their cooking, their wines, things like that, the planters planting. He says people would come to buy evening gowns and silver and gems to the Opera House and the Theatre de New Orleans and the St. Louis Cathedral, from whose open doors came the chants of High Mass over the crowds of the Place d'Armes on Sundays, over the noise and bickering of the French market, over the silent, ghostly drift of the ships along the raised waters of the Mississippi, which flowed against the levee above the ground of New Orleans itself, so that the ships appeared to float against the sky. This was New Orleans, a magical and magnificent place to live, in which a vampire, richly dressed and gracefully walking through the pools of light of one gas lamp after another, might attract no more notice in the evening than hundreds of other exotic creatures, if he attracted any at all. If anyone stopped to whisper behind a fan, "That man, how pale, how he gleams, how he moves, it's not natural." A city in which a vampire might be gone before the words had even passed the lips, seeking out the alleys in which he could, like a cat, the darkened bars, or see like a cat, the darkened bars in which sailors slept with their heads on the tables, great high-ceilinged hotel rooms where a lone figure might sit, her feet upon an embroidered cushion, her legs covered with lace counterpane, her head bent under the tarnished light of a single candle, never seeing the great shadow move across the plaster flowers of the ceiling, never seeing the long white finger reach to press the fragile flame. So maybe too much. I kind of want to keep reading. Now I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to read this again. I read you a whole page, but it's so good. So that shows you the writing style as well as the setting. New Orleans is described with all this like wrought iron work, you know, fences and hanging, what is it, bougainvillea? I don't know how to say it. Some kind of blooming plant, flowery thingy hanging everywhere. And just the way she describes like the French Quarter is amazing. You start to learn all the names of all the streets in the French Quarter, and you just fall in love with New Orleans when you read this series. The next reason you should read the Vampire Chronicles is because of the setting when it comes to the time period. So I just described to you New Orleans from the 1800s in Interview with the Vampire, but you don't want to read about that? That's okay. You can read about France in the 1700s. You can read about modern day California, where vampires become rock stars. Russia in like the 1500s, 1400s, honestly can't remember, but a long time ago in Russia, a very long time ago in Imperial Rome. Modern day in a swamp. I mean, heaven and hell, for crying out loud. So there's a lot of different settings of the Vampire Chronicles. So if you're not intrigued by one of them, hopefully you will find something that interests you in one of the other ones. All right, number 5, the 5th reason you should read the Vampire Chronicles is because of the atmosphere. I've kind of already talked about this when I mentioned the setting and the writing style, but the atmosphere that you are put into, you are so sucked into it because it is dark, it is mysterious, it's kind of like lovely all at once though, because of the way she describes everything. I've never really quite read another series like this. I can't really even describe to you, I can't compare it really to anything else. It's in a category of its own. I highly, highly recommend that you check it out because the atmosphere is so just enthralling would be the perfect word. So the next reason you should read the Vampire Chronicles is because of the existential kind of philosophy and debates that go on between the characters in this book, including in the characters' own heads, but especially conversations between the characters. And you might think, why would I want to read about that? But it's fascinating to think about. So I'm going to give you an example. So from the 4th book, Tale of the Body Thief, Lestat, our, of course, amazing, dashing protagonist, the James Bond of protagonists here, right, is talking to one of the other characters, and he says, Lestat says, I have a particular interest in the devil, obviously. I speak of him much more often than I speak of God. I can't figure out really why mortals love him so much. I mean, why they love the idea of him, but they do. Because they don't believe in him, David said. Because a perfectly evil devil makes even less sense than a perfect God. Imagine the devil never learning anything during all this time, never changing his mind about being the devil. It's an insult to our intellect, such an idea. So what's your truth behind the lie? He's not purely irredeemable. He's merely part of God's plan. He's a spirit allowed to tempt and try humans. He disapproves of humans, of the entire experiment. See, that was the nature of the devil's fall, as I see it. The devil didn't think the idea would work. But the key, Lestat, is understanding that God is matter, God is physical, God is the Lord of cell division, and the devil abhors the excess of letting all this cell division run wild. So there are a lot of conversations like that in these books about kind of why they even exist, what it means to be good or evil. Is Lestat evil? He doesn't want to be, he's decided, but sometimes he does evil things. He says he is going down the devil's road, but he tries to be as good as he can and tries to only kill the evil doer. But he discusses a lot of things, including kind of like the purpose of life and especially like why vampires would exist and are they evil? Are people born evil, you know, there's just all that sort of discussion in here. And I think that those ideas are fascinating. It makes these books very deep and more than just about vampires. So the next reason you might want to read the Vampire Chronicles, or that you should read it, is because of the mythology in it. So Anne Rice comes up with this whole vampire history about where the first vampires came from, why there are vampires, kind of the vampire lineage. It's really interesting because you're like, where did the first vampire come from? How did they even start, right? So this book, The Vampire Lestat, kind of, especially the second half, deals sort of with kind of the origins. So this is the second book, but then the third one really goes into detail. This book deals with the kind of mythology of vampires, where they came from, and it is truly fascinating because it's just so unique and original. So I highly suggest you read the Vampire Chronicles, at least the first 3 or 4, just to learn about the history of vampires. So the next reason you would want to read the Vampire Chronicles, I think this is number 8, I kind of lost count at this point, but it's because of the other characters. So not only Lestat is awesome, but the cast of characters in this is amazing. Honestly, this is a very character-driven work. I'm not gonna lie, some of the books don't even have that much plot. There might be like one main overarching plot, but that's really about it. So I would highly recommend reading it though for characters like Louis. You've got Louis, he's just sort of an emo vampire, I guess you would say. He's always mopey. He's like, oh, I'm evil now, I don't want to be a vampire. Oh, I've got to suck blood, but I only want to drink animal blood, and I'm so sad and miserable. That's Louis. Then you've got Lestat's mom, Gabrielle, who is just, you know, very independent, does her own thing, wants to be out in nature. She's like, okay, Lestat, you know, I'm just gonna go do something else now. I'm bored of this. So like, I'll see you in a couple hundred years. Bye. Then you've got Armand, who it's like, okay, well, Armand sucks. Nobody likes Armand, right? You've got Marius, who's like super old, thinks Lestat's crazy. Like, Lestat, you can't do this. Vampires don't do that. That'd be breaking the rules. And Lestat's like, well, whatever, I do what I want. And that's, of course, that's Lestat for you. You've got David Talbot, who is the leader of this society of people that investigate things, paranormal things like vampires and witches, and he gets a little too involved, and a lot of things happen to him. I can't spoil anything, but really cool. That's who Lestat was talking to him into in one of the books. David's awesome. Let's see, who else do we have? Oh, of course, Claudia. How can we forget Claudia? Interview with the Vampire, you know, vampire kid, vampire child. And then, like I mentioned, even in the new series that has the 3 new books in it, they start introducing new characters as well. Number 9, you would want to read this book because of the plot. And I just said a minute ago that you don't really want to read it because of the plot, because the characters are definitely way more the focus, but when there is plot, that sounds bad to say, there's not a huge amount of plot in these books, but when there is plot, it's really, really compelling. Things do build on each other. Like, you could technically read some of these books without having read all the rest of them, but they're, especially at the beginning, they really do build on each other. And the plot, like I said, with the, you know, mythology, where you kind of learn about the history of all these characters. And then if you do like one of these other characters, you could read one of the books that focuses purely on them. So like, if you liked Pandora, she doesn't get much screen time really in these books, but she is one of the new tales of the vampire. You can learn about her. You can learn more about Armand if for some crazy reason you like Armand, because who likes him? If you like Merrick, because she's a witch and a vampire, which how cool is that, then you can read the story about Merrick. And if you love Marius, because Marius is awesome, then you can read Blood and Gold, which is a big book all about the history of Marius. So some of these books do focus on other characters, set in other time periods, all that stuff, and they give you very different plots than like the original trilogy, which is really all like the whole story about Lestat. The last reason, number 10, why you'd want to read the Vampire Chronicles is so that you can enjoy Interview with the Vampire, the movie. So I love this movie so much, but I do feel like if you've read the books, it's so much more just like valuable, and it's so good, because I'm sure if you saw the movie and you were like, okay, this is pretty good, but you would not understand kind of the depth of the characters. You wouldn't, and while the portrayals are great, right? Like Lestat, Tom Cruise Lestat is just awesome, and Brad Pitt as Louis is like crazy good. But when you have read the books and then you see it come to life on the screen, you're just so happy because they do such justice to it. It's clear that Anne Rice was part of it. I think she helped write the screenplay, or mostly wrote the screenplay for it. So she knows her stuff, obviously, because she wrote the books. So her screenplay is going to be incredibly accurate to the books. The atmosphere, you get the same atmosphere, you get the tone, the music is amazing. But I feel like, you know, it'd just be out of place if you just watched it randomly, you know, but like if you'd read the books, you would understand, hey, that's the atmosphere that I was getting in the book. Now I'm seeing it like come to life and feeling it and seeing what this New Orleans looks like. And it's so fun to get to see it come to life. Queen of the Damned, not so much, not a great movie. I would not recommend that. I watched it just because obviously it's like my favorite book and I had to watch it, but no, it didn't hold up. So those are 10 reasons that you should read The Vampire Chronicles by Anne Rice. I highly recommend her other series as well, The Witching Hour, which follows the lives of the Mayfair witches. It's a trilogy. The first one in it is one of the best books like I've ever read. It's like 1,000 pages though. Even if you don't want to read all of these, a lot of people think that at least like the first 3 are really, really good because these are all really, this is sort of like a trilogy kind of, I mean, not really, but this is more one story about Lestat and about or at least these 2 especially. So I would at least read these. The 4th one, Tale of the Body Thief, also really good. It goes a little off the rails. A lot of people don't like Memnoch. The 5th one, I'm not a huge fan either. But the series still, it still is really good. Like even the new books I think are amazing. So I don't think it really went too far off the rails because I just love the writing so much it doesn't really matter to me. I'd read whatever Anne Rice writes. I'll read Lestat like doing the dishes. I don't even care. All right, thanks guys for watching. Please go read The Vampire Chronicles. I don't feel like it gets talked about enough on BookTube, but I hope to make a lot more videos about it because I love them so much. So I will talk to you guys later. Bye.